Hello and welcome to another episode of Copper's Corner Podcast, your musical history podcast. I'm your host, Copper Kelly, and this week we're talking about Townes Van Zandt with none other than folk singer-songwriter Kenan Flannery. Say hello, Kenan. How are you doing?
How are you getting on, Copper? Jesus,
not too bad.
It's been a while.
It's been the other day.
It's nice. Yeah, it's been the other day. I'm trying to pretend.
Yeah.
This space feels familiar in that kind of way.
It does, yeah. It's reminiscent of another podcast, you could say.
Oh, it is indeed.
For those that don't know, I have another podcast with Mr. Kenan Flannery called the Arts Saddle Podcast. And we do music news and crack, and we talk all sorts of kind of stuff for hours on end, and it's great fun altogether.
We do a lot of messing.
A lot of messing. But this is a serious podcast now, Kenan. So
See,
no
I can
swearing.
tell you have your serious shirt on.
You have a black shirt, serious shirt, yeah.
Yes, serious shirt.
That's it. But Kenan, I suppose before we go on, do you want to tell the people, give a little brief rundown of who you are and what you do?
What do I do? Well, yeah, as I think it's long and short is, yeah, I'm a songwriter from Dublin, Ireland. Been doing it for a couple of years now, and I just have a strong link with Irish ballad music and folk storytelling, and I was kind of raised on stories, songs and stories, as they say, and yeah, I've been doing it. Yeah, that's kind of my story in the long and short. We're not here to talk about me, but I think it needs great on to the act we're going to be talking about today, because, true storyteller he was.
I suppose, we're going to be talking about Townes Van Zandt. I suppose he's a musician's musician. And what I mean by that is a lot of musicians really look up to him and find him inspiring, but maybe the casual musical listener might not know him so well. But I suppose, why did you pick Townes Van Zandt, Kenan?
There's a multitude of reasons, I think. But I think the main thing is, I went through a stage where, people say things find you when they meant it.
Yeah.
Things come to you when they're meant to come to you. And I was going through quite a low point in my life, and I found Townes' music. And as he was quoted saying, he writes sad music and hopeless music. And that's the two types of songs he writes. And I think there's a reason why us as people and societies have an obsession with sad music. It's a weird concept that we enjoy listening to stuff that's sad.
Yeah.
But I think it weirdly does the opposite to us.
Yeah, it's cathartic.
It makes you feel,
in a way.
it makes you feel less alone.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you feel like you're the only one, and then you hear someone singing and you go, this feels like it's through some distant thing. I don't know what it is, but I feel like this has a part of me in it, and I never felt that with any other artist as strongly as I did with Townes. And it was just a whim how I found him, and it was I really just think it was I couldn't have found him any earlier or any later. I think it was the perfect time to start listening to his music. So
That's it. Yes. So Townes himself, he was he wrote a lot of sad songs, hopeless songs, as you said. And he was a real singer-songwriter in every sense of the word. And he had a short life, I suppose you could say. He died when he was, I think it was 52. But we'll get to, I suppose, what culminated in his death towards the end of the show. But I suppose we can start off at the very start. So his full name was John Townes Van Zandt, and he's born March 7th, 1944. And he's not the first now that I've done on this show to be born in the 40s. But he was groomed to be an entirely different kind of legend than a music legend. So he actually was born into the Van Zandt family, who were basically kind of very, very well off, very well known family in Texas. So he was born into a life of comfort, you could say. And his great-great-grandfather, Isaac Van Zandt, was an original son of the Republic, it says. So he was appointed charge d'affaires to the United States by Sam Houston in 1842. But yeah, there's actually a place in Texas, 50 miles east of Dallas, called Van Sant County, and it's named for Townes' great-great-grandfather. So his name is basically a name of a town. So he, he's born into greatness, I suppose you could say. And he had a lot of pressure on his shoulders, you could say.
Yeah, he did, yeah. There's a lot of high kind of, you would call them kind of high class careers. It's like, once it goes back, centuries, none of them were kind of, it seems like he was the only kind of black sheep, as they would say,
That's it. And so his succeeding generations of Isaac Van Sant, they were civic leaders who kind of built up the Fort Worth area in Texas, from a dusty cow town to a transportation hub of the New West. So Townes got his name from John Charles Townes, his great-grandfather on his mother's side, and for whom Townes Hall, the main building at the University of Texas at Austin School of Law, is named. So he has some big shoes to fill. There's a town, a town called Van Sant, and there's a building at the University of Texas in Austin, School of Law, named after his great-grandfather on his mother's side. But he didn't really want to stick to the comfort life so long. You were saying just before we start recording, he was kind of attracted to the more, I suppose, poorer lifestyle, you could say.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll get into more as we go along, but he is a tour manager that he used to work with Harold Egger Jr. He wrote a book called My Years with Townes Van Zandt, and one of the stories was he used to have to make sure he'd go into bars and tell the bar members, like the owners, not to give the money to Townes, to give it to him. Because what Townes would do is, after a gig, he would go on a boozer and he would drive around hammered.
Yeah.
And he'd just get out and give money to homeless people, and he'd give his entire fee, he'd just give it away to people on the street. Like, he had a really soft spot for kind of the damned and wicked of the world, as you would say.
Yeah.
So
he had a good heart in him anyway. But others say he was not so good in other ways. But we'll get to that kind of stuff as we go. But when Townes was 9, he saw Elvis Presley on the Ed Sullivan Show, and he asked his father for a guitar for Christmas. And actually, we covered this on the Elvis Presley episode there a few weeks ago, about the Elvis on the Ed Sullivan Show. And it was a case that Elvis's hips were causing a distraction to the youth, apparently.
Yes, was. His hip thrusting and all the things he had going on down there.
Shakira's hips don't lie. Elvis didn't lie either.
Oh, they did.
But when Townes saw this anyway, it was like a light bulb going off in his head. It's like, I want to do that. That looks cool. So his father got him a guitar, and after promising to learn Fräulein as his first song, he got one.
And you're a big fan of the You do it.
I do. You actually introduced me to that song, Kenan.
No way.
You did, yeah. We haven't surfaced it yet, but we did a recording of it.
You give out to me all the time about this now. I told you, it'll get there. It's the people aren't ready.
A year ago, probably.
People aren't ready for this.
They're not ready for it, yeah. But yeah, Fräulein, great song. I play it, and you play it as well, and it's just a fantastic song. So
beautiful.
He promised to learn it, and he played it throughout his career as well. It was one of his well-known songs, I suppose you could say. And so his family did move around a lot when he was a kid. But in school, he wrestled and played baseball and football. But he loved practical jokes. So he's always pranking people. And apparently, they couldn't test his IQ because it was so high. It was way above 140. So that's interesting.
There is a lot of... you'll see as you go along, especially in his his teen years, there's a lot of grains of salt you have to sprinkle along the stories. You know, there's always stuff that's said.
Exaggerate a little bit, I'd say.
Yeah, and other people did, and especially how he became such, you know, he was loved by many but known by none. I think is a good way to put it. Like, a lot of his music is famous from people like Willie Nelson, you know.
Yeah, we have to mention actually Pancho and Lefty is probably his most famous song, which was covered by Emmylou Harris and eventually then by Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard. And
still to this day, you have people like, you know, the First Aid Kit. They're a folk duo, two girls, and they're killing there. And they done a cover of "Waitin Round to Die," and I think it exposed a new generation of upcoming like folk listeners to this, you know, to the Townes Van Zandt kind of discography. It's
"Waitin Round to Die" is another of his big ones. And actually, first time I heard that song was a while back, was Whitey Morgan in the 78s. They did a cover of it. I just love the song. But then I think you said it to me later, oh, that's a Townes Van Zandt song. Oh, is it? Really? Even Pancho and Lefty, I heard that many times. And I didn't know it was Townes Van Zandt until, I don't know how I found it out. I just, discovered, it's actually Townes Van Zandt.
That's the kind of, it's so, people loved it. And I'm sure we'll get into it. I'll say the stories for later, but there's some stories where he got out of some illegal predicaments because he wrote the song, and with his first wife, you know, you were saying "Wait Around to Die." Like when he wrote all these, he wrote "Wait Around to Die." He wrote "Nothing," which is another really heart wrenching song, and he wrote them in a cupboard in his flat. He used to live above an old bar. The bar lady was his landlord, and him and his wife Fran, his first wife, he locked himself, and she thought they were great. She thought everything was going well, and he came out after a few days and was like, "Babe, listen to these songs I wrote," and they were just the most like painful, heart wrenching songs. And he kind of started going like, "I thought things were all right between us. What's the crack with this?" Like,
it's something you're not telling me.
Yeah.
But when he was his last 2 years of high school, his parents sent him to the exclusive Shattuck Military Academy in Faribault. I hope I'm saying that right. Faribault, Minnesota. Where he later said he got a serious private prep school, ivy-covered education. And basically he was being groomed to be a Texas senator or a lawyer.
Yeah. A lawyer, lawyers ran in the family, like, you know, so it was kind of just...
It was expected of him.
It was kind of just given, It was just given, like, you know.
Yeah. And in 1962, he enrolled at the University of Colorado, where he wrote poetry, played guitar for fun, and listened to records by Lightning Hopkins and Hank Williams. Hank Williams being another topic of, I think, my third episode with Grum Gallagher. So it's all kind of coming around again.
Yeah. It's full circle.
All full circle. And Hank Williams was actually one of Townes Van Zandt's greatest hero. And this was not to spoil the story too much, but he ended up dying on the same day, I think 50 years later, that Hank Williams died. New Year's Day. Yeah. So it's all full circle, as we were saying.
Full circle, like kind of you'd wonder about coincidence, wouldn't you? One of these kind of ways, yeah.
You never know.
But
he was a good student, and he was popular with his professors. That's when Townes met Fran, who you mentioned already, his first girlfriend, or first wife, I guess, eventually.
Peters, I believe her name.
Yeah,
Peters.
I haven't got her second name here for some reason. But they were start dating, and but apparently, when he was in college, he kind of became a bit wild. He wasn't living up to these expectations. He wasn't... buttoning up and putting his head in the books. Well, what was he up to instead? Do you have any stories from that time?
Do I have any stories from that time? He used to, he would go to a lot of, he would do a lot of wild things. Like, there's stories out there of him, throwing himself off 4-story balconies and like hitting the ground like flat on his back and getting up without spilling like an inch of his alcohol.
Yeah.
And like, you know, you sprinkle salt on these, but there is a lot of that.
It could have been
There's
like the first floor maybe,
Yeah.
but then someone said fourth. But you know, it could be something like that.
But he used to, what else did he do? We used to put he went to one of these prep parties, I believe, you know, one of these fancy society things, and he went in, and they basically, he was drinking, him and his mates were drinking in the dorm, and he said, there's a party over there for the society I'm a part of, let's go. There was free drinking stuff, so he showed up and he's drinking away, and they weren't happy with him coming because he came shirtless and he wasn't wearing a uniform.
These be all preppy boys. He'd be all very.
But there's a badge you needed to wear for the society.
She wasn't wearing it to put the badge on.
They were like, you don't have your badge, and he's like, do you have one? And he said, yeah, and he gave it to him, and he pinned it to his skin.
Oh, Jesus.
Put it straight through his breast, and then just kept drinking.
Yeah.
And fun stories like that. A lot of drink driving, and mentioning Fran as well. Fran, I think Fran was working in a diner, or she was working somewhere where she wasn't well off. You know, but she was a hard working woman that kind of wanted a future, you know, that kind of way. That was kind of like, you know, seen as normal at the time, where you find a husband and settle down. And
your house, get your 2.5 kids, that kind of stuff.
That's it. And she wanted that, but she kind of liked the wildness of towns in a way. So I think that's where they kind of met. You know, that kind of.
That's it. But yeah, during his college years, his parents actually went and brought him home because they thought he was binge drinking and thought he was suicidal. And he was actually admitted into the UT medical branch in Galveston for 3 months of insulin shock therapy, which basically was they'd shoot him up, or they'd dose him with insulin to induce a coma in order to correct his behavioral problems, which obviously doesn't work. You know, that's not it would have been experimental at this time. And his mother actually said later that she regretted.
It was the biggest, one of the biggest. But saying that, I believe I'm kind of annoyed that I don't have the name off the top of my head, but it was some big country star. It could have been Dolly Parton, or could have been I forget. It was some big female country star, and she was done an interview, and she
EmmyLou Harris, was it?
Which one?
EmmyLou Harris, maybe. She's very close to him.
Well, she basically she got insulin shock therapy, and she's
right.
And she said that it was. She said no, it wasn't.
Tammy Wynette. I think that was
Tammy Wynette. Yeah, and
it was on the first episode we did.
yes, it was, and she said that it was beneficial for. And
that was electroshock therapy. That was
okay. I see.
And
things come full circle.
Everything comes full circle. That's right. Yeah, Tammy Wynette had the electric shock therapy, and she thinks that potentially it might have helped her.
Yeah,
something like that. So it's kind of hard to know, really.
It's hard to tell, isn't it? You know. So but yeah, I think that was the beginning. Everyone revolts against a family.
Yeah.
And it was coming down, like what? Do you remember what? He was born in
44.
Well, 44. Yeah. So he would have been, in the 60s when he was in college.
So he's 18, 19.
Yeah. So he's in college in the 60s, you know.
Yeah. Wild time as it was, like.
Wild times.
Yeah.
He's gonna revolt, you know. The previous generations, there was a structure, you know, people grew up and done this. Now, you know, people nowadays just take it for granted that kids will always revolt against their parents, but it wasn't really like that beforehand. But he probably started, and once that happened to him, I think this is the beginning, like, of, he had a bumpy road, but it was never straight. It was always slightly pointed downwards.
Yeah. And that's it. And it was said that actually this insulin shock treatment, it caused him long-term memory issues basically for the rest of his life. It had a very, very bad impact on him.
Didn't remember much of his childhood.
Yeah, it's true. And even Fran says it was too extreme. She thought he seemed okay to her. He seemed like a normal college student having, it's just, it was way too much. And of course, I suppose they were thinking, oh, we have to get him right now. He's going to be a senator, a lawyer. Oh, he's out drinking. He's making us look bad as a family. So we'll have to nip it in the bud now and get this shock therapy or, this insulin stuff, and just the wrong thing to do. And it caused him endless heartache probably for the rest of his life. But I suppose moving on into the spring of 1965, he enrolled at the University of Houston as a pre-law student, and he pledged to a fraternity. So that must be the fraternity that you, the prep boys that you were saying earlier on.
The prep. He has a great song. I think it's called Fraternity Blues. Where they teach you how to bubble. And he said he had to start drink in the song. It's like so he started bubbling. He started drinking the bubble, and then he ended up drinking too much and bubbling all over the dates. Just getting sick on them. But the Earle fraternities.
Yeah, I never understood that whole fraternity lifestyle. Thankfully, we don't have that in Ireland.
Yeah.
But himself and Fran married in August, and he went off soon then to join the Air Force. But the doctors wouldn't let him in because he was an acute manic depressive who has made minimal adjustments to life. So
he actually, just on that note, he was his parents actually gave out about that because it was quite a blunt way to say it. And a lot of I believe Fran said that she thought that was where he kind of mentally made the decision to be the troubadour, as they would, because it was such a blunt, dismissive way to kind of put someone off to the side.
Yeah.
It's quite a brutal way to say it. No, you wouldn't get away with saying that now.
No.
It'd be a lot better. They say the same thing and sugarcoat it. But that was quite a minimum adjustment.
That's it. So, his sister, Donna, actually said about him that if you and I would hear about a starving person, we just go on about our lives. But for him, for Townes, it would just break his heart. And Fran remembers him happily giving his money away. As you said earlier, he just giving away his paycheck from a gig, just giving it to the homeless people.
Yeah.
And he once brought a homeless man back to their Houston apartment. So he was endlessly generous.
Yeah.
And he had a big heart for the people in need. Because I suppose he came from such a silver spoon kind of a upbringing. He wanted to give it back, give back to those that didn't have that.
Yeah.
So he played guitar for, since he was a kid. But after a few years of playing for himself and friends and family, he decided to go play in front of strangers, in front of the public, I suppose. So he hung around Houston's Jester Lounge, and he opened for artists like Hopkins, Guy Clark, Jerry Jeff Walker, and Doc Watson. And then he developed his wheeling flat picking style from listening to Hopkins. So flat picking is a type of guitar picking.
Yeah.
Where you're right, it's kind of country folky kind of picking rhythm style. And he developed that. And
the first song he ever learned to finger pick was it's not the Johnny Cash version, but it's a song called Kkk Blues.
Oh yeah.
And
another one. Yeah.
I know the Doc Watson, I think, does a cover of it.
Right, yeah.
I think. No, don't quote me on that now. But that's the first song he ever learned to finger pick.
Yeah.
Bit of trivia there for you.
That's it. That's all. Keep it coming, man. And so this is actually when he started writing songs like Fraternity Blues, as you were not saying. And yeah, he later told an Austin DJ, Larry Monroe, that when he heard Bob Dylan's The Times They Are Changing, he decided that's what I'm going to do. Because at first he was writing, well, it says here, novelty songs, quote unquote, like Fraternity Blues. But I think he heard Times They Are Changing. It was more powerful, more of a powerful kind of a song. And he wanted to go down that route instead of singing novelty songs, you could say. But Bob Dylan, he's a big influence on you as well.
He is, yeah. Yeah, I would say.
You probably would have picked him if you didn't pick Townes Van Zandt for this episode, I'd say, would you?
Yeah, I think so. I think Bob Dylan, for me, is the second best songwriter of all time. And Townes is fourth, and I would think maybe someone like, it's kind of tied for third between Leonard Cohen and Guy Clark.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, somewhere in there. But I have a little story, if you don't mind showing in about Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Townes had a good relationship with Guy Clark, and another phenomenal artist that's kind of doesn't get enough recognition, Blaze Foley.
Oh, yeah.
He's incredible and heartbreaking. If you ever get someone on to talk about his story.
I hope so. It's an amazing story.
His heart, like, he spent his little while. I have a book over there written by his wife, the one that, If I Could Only Fly.
Yeah.
Song. The woman that's about, wrote this book, and it's just spent his entire life homeless.
Yeah.
Entire life just sleeping rough. And
people's couch. I think he lived one guy on his couch for 8 years. And
he used to,
yeah.
He used to travel and live with Townes as well, and he looked up to Townes a lot. And Townes was sometimes harsh to him. Townes once said that he, didn't, he would tell him if he didn't like a song, he didn't think it was good enough, whatever. Yeah. And Blaze wanted his recognition, that kind of way. Well, anyway, so you have Steve Earle.
Yeah.
Phenomenal writer. And Townes and him were very close. And one of the most famous quotes about Townes, and I have it here, where Steve Earle was quoted in an interview saying, "Townes Van Zandt is the best songwriter in the whole world, and I'll stand on Bob Dylan's coffee table in my cowboy boots and say it." Right? And Townes Van Zandt heard about this, and he was always he always loved getting the full attention of a crowd, but he never wanted fame. He hated the stardom of it. So the media kind of picked up on what Steve Earle was saying, and Townes commented on it, and he said, "I've met Bob Dylan's bodyguards, and if Steve Earle thinks he can stand on Bob Dylan's table, he's sadly mistaken."
Yeah.
So, a good little story now.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned Steve Earle, we could mention the famous Russian Roulette story. Do you know about this?
The famous Russian Roulette story.
Yeah. Because I actually listened to an interview with Steve Earle today, and he told the story as, apparently there's lots of different versions of the story going around.
Yeah.
But Steve was basically saying it was just me, Steve, and Townes there. No one else was there. So the story from Steve's mouth was that I think he was hanging out with Townes in his house or his trailer or wherever it was at the time, and Townes took out this new gun, a revolver with six, the barrel, the six bullets.
357 Magnum.
Could be. I'm not too. I can't remember my guns.
I have it written in front of me. I just no guns. Like, I'm not.
So I think Townes, he put the gun on the table. Steve Earle picked it up, took out the bullets, and Townes goes, "No, hey man, put them back in." And he did. But then Townes picked the gun back up, and he kind of flicked it, like in a real kind of gunslinger way. He kind of flicked out 5 of the bullets, left 1 in. And he said something along the lines of, I think my time is done here now. I'm going to move on. And he put the gun to his head. Click. Didn't go off, thankfully. But Steve was just sitting there like, hey, man, what are you doing? And he says himself, he was thinking that he was, in his mind, he was thinking, I don't want to be found guilty of shooting Townes if he was going to try to grab it and it accidentally went off. And he could be found guilty for it. But I think Townes did it a second time. And again, click, empty chamber. But then Steve managed to get the gun off him and threw it away. And he, in his own words, I think bet his ass. he just like, Townes, what the hell are you doing? Knocked some sense into him. Yeah.
As you would.
That's it.
Yeah. The story I heard is that he picked it up and just shot 3 consecutive shots in his head and then like put the gun down. But there's a a like
there's a few stories, yeah.
Not that I think the simplest way to put it is, I'm not saying anything's true or false, but I think the guy was a true character.
Yeah.
He was quite eccentric, I think the word you could put on it is. And he could light up a room when he came in. You know, he was one of these guys that, like, when he did something, he did it all or nothing. So when you think of something that he's done, you think of the 100% hammer to the, foot to the gas, just boom. You never think of, he's probably just, did this or did that. Like, you think of the most craziest thing because people just knew him for that. So I think the truth is between both of them somehow. There's a line somewhere that the truth is lying on, and but it's fun to listen to these crazy stories.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I suppose that story is from more in his future down the line. I guess we'll go back to the timeline. Back in, basically, he was still in college. He was studying to be a lawyer, but he kind of was doing it because he was supposed to do it. But in January 1966, Townes' father died at 52, which basically prompted Townes to go, okay, my father's dead, now I don't have to do this anymore. He left school and took to the road as a musician because he could tell that's what he wanted to do, basically, all the time. And so he started writing and write serious songs, basically going back to that Bob Dylan thing about hearing times changing and goes, I don't want to do that now. So he started writing serious songs, and one of these first one was, as you mentioned before, Waiting Around to Die, which is a phenomenal song. Again, I heard the a cover song, Whitey Morgan in the 78's cover, which I just loved immediately. It was like, yeah, there's something to this song, Then I found out later that was Townes Van Zandt. I think you told me. But yeah, he's it turned out to be a bit of a roadmap for his adult years. So some of the lyrics are, I guess I'll keep gambling, lots of booze, lots of rambling. And it's easier than just waiting around to die.
That's the one.
Yeah. And then in 67, he went to Nashville, where a tape he made caught the attention of Kevin Eggers, who was looking for acts for his fledgling independent label, Poppy Records.
Pop Record.
And following years, Edgar released Townes' first album, For the Sake of the Song, which I listened to there today, which is fantastic.
Yeah. There's a lot of Townes was, at the time, he was building up a big college following for his live shows. His intimate live performance is phenomenal. And Eggers, Poppy Records, which later became Tomato Records, I believe. But he got a really phenomenal producer in. I believe he worked with Elvis Presley. He worked with all these and loads of country stars. And the thing that they said was Townes wasn't not country, but he wasn't folk. He was
skirting the line between the two.
And that'd be great now.
Yeah.
But back then it was useless because
You'd know where to pigeonhole them.
There's no way to pitch them.
Yeah.
So they produce, for the sake of the song, the way you'd produce a country record.
Mm.
And there's some things there's like wailing choir solos and slide guitar, and it's cool. I like the record. I think it's a fun record, and I'm also biased because I'm a big fan of Townes. But I think if you look at it in a critical way, and that's the reason why a lot of the other records that came after had re-releases of the song. And I'm not going to be jumping ahead, but the next record we're going to talk about is my favorite. It's because of there was re-releases on it of songs from the first record.
Yeah,
but there was, they captured what they lost in the first record was the pure essence of what what people loved about him.
Yeah.
It's just pure raw performances. But in its own regard, I think it's a really fun record to listen to.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a bit enjoyable, and the artwork is very strange.
Mm.
So yeah,
it basically goes on here saying that he cut 5 more albums, all on Poppy, on the record label Poppy, but they were sometimes overproduced and frilly, and the Nashville sound threatening his dark vision. It says because Nashville, especially back in the late 60s, 70s, Nashville was very polished. It was very buttoned up. It was very, I don't know what to say, but it wasn't, it was very clean cut. As you call me, clean cut cowboy. But so the likes of, cowboy. You had the Nashville sound, and then you had, say, it goes on later on into the 70s, you had the outlaw country movement, which was Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings. They kind of went out on their own, had their own country sound. It was rougher, rawer. And they went out and did things their own way, and it gained a huge following. But I suppose Townes, who was before the outlaw scene was even a thing, he was a pioneer of the outlaw sound.
I think he was, I think I've always thought, even with the outlaw country, there's still a touch. Maybe at the start, just at the start, when the boys, Highwaymen and all these outlaw country started, it was rough and rugged. But the minute Nashville, the minute it became somewhat popular, the Nashville flair comes in, the polished sound, and I think it's still amazing, but I think I still think there wouldn't have been any different if he started releasing music, if his first record came when the outlaw country came, because he still just wasn't. He just walked this weird line between just like heavily influenced by blues as well, that kind of way. A lot of blues influences there, and the way he fingerpicked and played, there was blues. Loved country, loved old school country, and he took a lot of these influences, but obviously at the time wasn't really what was sellable, and
that's the thing. It's music is sometimes seen by the higher ups as a product they have to package and make it look nice and frilly and sell it, but songwriting is not always about that. You know yourself, Kean.
Complete opposite, my friend. Complete opposite.
That's it. But what was this album that you were... I haven't got the list of albums in front of me now, but what was this album that you said you really liked?
Well, I've been here, so it's called Mother the Mountain.
Okay.
Phenomenal album. The track on it called Mother the Mountain, and it's haunting. I'm one of these, I'm awful at remembering what's on records when I'm put on the spot.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
But there was, let me just double check. There was a handful of records on it, a handful of tracks on the record that came from the first album. And they pulled everything back. And the records that came after, they pulled everything back and just let Townes be Townes.
Yeah.
There's phenomenal songs on it. St. John the Gambler is another one, and Kathleen, which was probably one of my top 3 favorite songs.
Okay,
And it was haunting.
Yeah,
check them out. You know, I'll make you. Yeah, I'll make you a little playlist.
Do
good Townes. I've been trying to get you into Townes for a very long time.
Oh no, I mean, I just haven't listened to it all yet.
We'll be getting you in. You'll be getting in. You'll be a troubadour after this.
Oh yeah.
But his music was just like, that album was absolutely phenomenal. And at the start of his career, he was churning out albums.
Yeah, he had 6 pretty quickly, like on Poppy on that record label.
Yeah, Sake of the Song came in 68. A Mother the Mountain and just self-titled Townes Van Zandt were both in 69.
Yeah.
Delta Mama Blues was in 70. High Low in between 71. And then the late great Townes Van Zandt was in 72. And then kind of, he was getting old at this point. He done the live at the Old Quarter, which is regarded by many as one of the best live albums of all time. But that was a few years later. And but he was churning them out, and there was a battle, there was a power struggle amidst the producer wasn't being paid, and some of the family thought that Kevin Eggers, he was kind of swindling with money and kind of, but he would argue that he loved Townes. And it's interesting to read the book from Harold Eggers about, because Harold Eggers is his brother, like, so it's interesting to hear his side of it. But there's a lot of things that happen behind closed doors, but one thing's for certain, they pumped out the records, and you know, he was really he was on fire at this point. You know, I believe like this was.
I suppose Pancho and Lefty was his most famous song today, but that was also released in this era, I suppose. I'm not
Pancho
sure
and Lefty.
Which album was that on?
I think it was the Late Grey Townes.
Late Grey, so that was his 6th album at this stage. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he actually said that as he was writing songs, he said, believed that the sky was full of songs just waiting to be pulled in. And he said that Pancho and Lefty came through the window of a seedy hotel room, and that If I Needed You came to him in his sleep in a flu-driven fever dream. And he says, quote, I was tapped on the shoulder from above and told to write these songs as opposed to wanting to be a success in the music business. Which is actually true of him, because all he wanted to do was write songs, play in front of people, kind of hang out with his friends. He had no interest in the industry side of things. He didn't want to promote himself, build himself up, create a brand, create an image. He just wanted to go and play songs, which was totally admirable.
Everyone else around him, you know, his team, the people I wouldn't say his team because we really have a team, but like, one of the most interesting things about him that I thought was he was never signed to a major label. It was always independent labels. I don't think he ever got even any offers from major labels. But the sort of people that worked with him walk to the bone to try to make him successful. And you know, that book from his tour manager he would be like dragging Townes from place to place, because Townes just wanted to stay with people.
Yeah, so hang out and have a good time.
Hang out and do ridiculously good. Yeah. But the same with Kevin Eggers, like, you can say, you know, what you want about him and his relationship with Townes, but he, you know, he tried his best, because at the end of the day, you know, Poppy Records ended up going, you know, going under, like, and I think he made Tomato Records after that, which Townes' later stuff came out on.
Yeah, it's true.
But he thought, it was like, this can be a successful thing for both of us, you know. Townes just didn't give a shit, like, you know, that kind of way. Didn't care, like, just kind of wanted to I loved music for the sake of it. So.
Yeah. And in 1968, a young EmmyLou Harris saw him in a pub, a bar, Gurd's Folk City. And she said, actually, it was a taping of the Austin City Limits, which a famous album he did. She says, I was stunned. I had never seen anything like that before. I thought he was the ghost of Hank Williams with a twist. So EmmyLou Harris will actually be the topic of a future episode. But I'll say no more until it's recorded and in the bag. But she was the first to actually record a cover version of Pancho and Lefty. I don't know.
I didn't know that.
No,
I didn't know that. No, I thought
version.
Willie Nelson was, but interesting.
It's a really, really beautiful version. But yeah, then obviously Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard went on to record the most famous version, I suppose. But in 1969, Townes was in Lubbock, hitchhiking to Houston. His backpack crammed with copies of Our Mother the Mountain, your favourite album. But he had no clothes, and he was picked up by Joe Eli, and he gave Eli the record. And that night, Eli and Jimmy Dale Gilmore stayed up listening to it and learning to play the songs. And, it helps get Townes back on his feet again. But in 1971, Townes overdosed on heroin and almost died. So this is now getting into the hard lifestyle choices.
Yeah.
He was
so this is a year after his first marriage with Fran ended.
Right.
And he was already beginning to be a bit too eccentric, and he loved women as well, and he never really never liked bringing wives on tour, and especially when it comes to his second wife. But he just, it was enough, and I think that was he had no one was looking after him at this point. He was on his own mentally, so he kind of derailed, and wherever he was living, I know he had an apartment around this time, and it was said by his tour manager that when you went into it, it was like walking into hell. Like there would be like people like the stairs up, the escalator was broken.
Yeah,
and the stairs up, there would be people lying on the stairs, covered in piss, and then going to his door would never be locked, and you'd go in and there'd be like random people just sleeping or taking heroin or drugs or whatever, and you would always be out of it, and you trying to get them to studios and trying to get them on tour was like trying to look after a child, really.
Yeah.
Like, that's what they're saying. So
that's it. So yeah, it was just part of his life now. He was getting into all sorts of stuff. The heroin was the big thing, so he overdosed on it. And then he actually he was featured in a movie called Heart-Worn Highways in 1975. It was more of a, I suppose, country music documentary. And he's seen in it, he's playing around, he's wandering playfully around an Austin backyard in the middle of the day with a bottle of whiskey, a can of Coke, and a BB gun. And so, and then, he released his sixth album in the late great Townes Van Zandt. But given he was prone to large, I suppose, deep bouts of depression and his adventures of manic frenzy, people took the title a little, I suppose, literally, thinking, oh, did he actually die? Because he was living that lifestyle that people would think, oh no, he'd be the type of guy to die fairly young, I suppose. But so he's plenty of reckless stories, and he goes on, talks about the Steve Earle 5 a.m. game of Russian Roulette, the one I told earlier on. And
it's another great story from Steve Earle about first time Townes ever seen Earle play live. He asked him to play the Wabash Cannonball, which is like an old folk tune, an old like a Civil War kind of folk track, and Steve didn't know it. So Townes spent the entire night just getting drunk and heckling him. And like shouting abuse at him on stage, and he said it was well, what else did he say? Come on, please. Yeah, no, just gave him hell. Gave him hell over everything, and just and other things like that he would do with Steve was he was telling Steve about a book called War and Peace. And he said, you should read it. You should read it. And Steve read it and was really excited to he was like, I can't wait to talk to Townes about it. Because no one apparently couldn't find anyone that read it. So he sat down with Townes and started telling Townes about it. And Townes was like, oh, I never read it. I just thought it'd be something that you might want to read. So he did a lot of, he was a prankster, but he did a lot of like small things that it just annoyed people.
Yeah.
But he did it out of a bit of fun. Yeah, he found it funny. Like,
that's it. So apparently he was gambling a lot as well. But he was confirmed. He was actually Harold, Kevin Egger's brother, said he was very similar to Hank Williams, but he was also running himself into a wall. But then he spent most of the 70s moving between Austin, Houston, and Nashville, New York, and the mountains of Crested Butte, Colorado, where he owned half an interest in a horse. So he would, it's like, I suppose, you'd own half the horse, another guy would own half the horse. But he would take the horse and he'd go riding into the countryside for days on end.
And because people used to say, because there's loads of pictures of him riding horses.
Yeah.
And he'd go off and he would travel and he wouldn't come back for days. And, people thought he was a cowboy. And he loved cowboy films. But apparently he was pretty bad. Like, he was just mediocre at horse ride. Like, he didn't really know much about it.
Yeah.
But this is where the story of Townes being kind of a bit of a cheek kind of comes in. He would tell people that he was a cowboy, and all these pictures of him shirtless with a cowboy hat on. But apparently, he didn't know the first thing about a horse. He just liked horses, but he would just and this is where the stories come in. But it's so funny, like, it's,
That's it. But his son, John, remembered spending a year with his father in Austin around this time in the 70s. So they spent basically listening to all his unrecognized folk players and pickers, and then drink and play every night until morning. So that was every night for a year, pretty much. It's hard going.
Yeah.
But apparently Townes, he surrounded himself with desperate people, as you mentioned earlier, and he didn't have to explain his way of living to them. But also, he would go down to Skid Row and give each of the winos $5, it says here. And Townes, he almost resented money himself. But then, going on to his, I suppose, final decade, he released, in 87, he released the first album of new songs in 9 years, which is called At My Window, on the new label Sugar Hill Records. But by then, he was 43. He was living in Nashville with his third wife, Janine, and the 4-year-old son, Will. And he also had a daughter coming in 92 who was Katie Bell.
Katie Bell.
92, yeah. And so he had a lot of extraordinary collection of songs to his credit. And then many of the artists he had inspired 10 or 20 years before were now making albums of their own. So these included Steve Earle, Eli, Gilmore, Harris, Lovett, Crowell, Butch Hannock, and Lucinda Williams. So now he inspired them, and now they were making albums themselves. And so, but then the life of hard living started taking its toll, and he could kind of start hearing it in his voice, which was apparently lower and thinner. And he often kind of spoke his lyrics instead of singing them when he was playing live.
Well, his later stuff was he overdosed and he basically medically died, and they had to resuscitate him and pump his inside. But to do that, they had to stick tubes down his throat, and they just messed up his vocal cords. So that's where his voice changed. You'll see it after. So At My Window, it was before At My Window. There was 2 records. There was one called Flying Shoes, and quite a good record. It was up there, but it was also kind of flopped, if you want to. Not flop, but it just wasn't. It didn't shoot him to stardom. And the other record before At My Window as well, which came out. So Flying Shoes came out in 78, and 77 was, as I said, the Live at the Old Quarter. Which whoever is listening, if you take nothing from this, history class, just take one small thing and listen fully. Don't shuffle it, right? Listen fully to the Townes Van Zandt Live at the Old Quarter. He did a three show, 3 shows, 3 nights in the Old Quarter, and the last show was recorded, and it's phenomenal. And it's I think people say around the late 70s was probably the peak in terms of Townes and his skill, and the live album's incredible. And he has all these really bad, the way he was saying he loved making jokes.
Yeah.
And we love our dad jokes on the Earle Art Saddle podcast now. We do. But he had he has these really, really just stupid jokes that he'd say. And there was one where he would say, what's white and crawls up your leg?
What?
Uncle Ben's perverted rice. It's like everyone would just go, just like we'd laugh at a dad joke. But,
yeah.
And then he'd just go straight.
Yeah,
and his delivery it was flat.
Yeah.
And just dry, and it was funny. He loved telling them. He loved, and there's other, about a drunk man was walking down the road. Finds a police officer. He goes, "Hey man, I'm at the losing. Someone robbed me car. I was just parked at the end of the quay, and he goes, and the police officer's like, look, you just go down to the station. Reporter will book it in, and we'll sort it out for you." And he goes, "Yeah, thanks." And he's walking off, and the police officer goes, "Hey dude, before you go, just zip up your fly." And the drunk guy looks down and goes, "Oh, they got me girl too." And it's just this awkward laugh that people give.
Oh, really?
And then he would just go straight into Waiting Around to Die, or some really heart-wrenching song. Ooh, but it just came after this crude jokes. But
so
there you go.
And apparently at this time his live performances were dicey at the best, you could say. Sometimes he was brilliant. What?
If he did them,
a lot of them, if he turned up,
yeah.
But then sometimes he had a great gig. Everyone loved it. Everyone's applauding him. Everyone had a great time. But other times he was incredibly drunk on stage, and he would kind of, as I heard, I think Steve Earle describe it, or was it Bobby Womack, I think described it. He went into this kind of babbling Cajun gobbledygook for he just kind of started singing but kind of, he went basically off the rails and started basically singing gibberish. And people would at time get up and leave, and other people would actually come to see if it was going to be a train wreck in one way. And apparently I heard a story of a nurse show where he turned up and he had a saxophone with him, and he put the saxophone on a stand on the stage and just kind of left it there, looked at it a few times throughout the show. He just kind of looked at it, never touched it. And then toward the end of the show, I think he picked it up and he belted out like a blues sax solo. And the guy who was telling the story said it sounded amazing. It was like completely off the cuff, really amazing. And then as soon as the solo was over, he just jumped down off stage and ran out. And that was it, the end of the gig. So he did full of surprises.
He did a lot of weird kind of gig stuff, and he also had a like, I like to call it a Nirvana MTV moment. Or what was it, MTV? No, it was what's the one that they had the lip sync on?
Oh, Top of the Pops, is it?
Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
He had a similar kind of experience, not with lip syncing, but he did a big show in some place in Texas somewhere, big cathedral show, and people came in suits, and he had a suit, and had a set, and it was kind of his breakthrough show, and he had two lined up, and the idea was Kevin Eggers was pushing to get him into the big cathedral venues, and he didn't like them. He hated
too big for him.
Yeah, so he did one where he just butchered it. He did one where he just butchered it, and they hated it, and they were very mad at Kevin over it, but he did it on purpose.
Yeah.
Or he said he did it on purpose. But there's another one that he did, and it was at the time when it was a song that he wrote, and it was they were like, don't do it. It's not funny. There's a lot of sudden white folks around. Don't do it. And he was like, I won't. And then he went out, and he just got a bad vibe from the crowd. So he played it, and the song is called the Kkk Blues.
Oh God, yeah.
And it's basically just being a guy that's kind of fed up with life, and he like decides to join the KKK, but it's like on the nose humor, like it's slagging them and
slagging satire of the KKK.
Yeah, and he did it, and it went. Apparently, he tried to kind of buckle the show in a way. He tried to use that song, but people still loved the show. It was weird that you were saying like sometimes you would do a phenomenal show and sometimes be horrific. But
people would come to see if it was going to be a train wreck. They wanted to see it go bad sometimes.
The thing was, when people went to see him when he was good, people would say when he was good, he was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like when people that went to see him at a good stage, he was absolutely incredible. And he did a show in Ireland as well, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point. But I'm awful hopping. I'm like time warping at this point. Just hopping around. But yeah.
Yeah. So basically, he playing gigs throughout the 90s and early 90s, you could say. And he's apparently the only thing he ever wanted to do, he told Janine at the time, was to write the perfect song that would save someone's life. But the only thing his friends and family wanted was to help save himself.
Yeah.
So he had already been taken to treatment centers, like rehabilitation centers, probably a dozen times throughout his life so far. But he let them take him to a Nashville treatment center, but not before having a drink in the Dallas airport. And so he says to his friend who was taking him to the treatment center, "Amigo, I've been drinking for 30 years. You can't feel guilty now that you can't stop me," he says. And so in his last 3 years, he started deteriorating a lot. He almost died in 94 when Janine, by this time, his third ex-wife, drove him to Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville for pneumonia. But But then on Christmas Eve of 96, 2 years later, he fell and hurt his hip. And he didn't want to seek any treatment. He was hurting really bad. He didn't want to go. You want to jump in there?
He was meant to play at the Sonic Youth Sessions, which is quite a... well, he did a Sonic Youth were a band.
Yeah.
And he was meant... The drummer, Steve Shelley. Steve Shelley?
I don't know, to be honest with you.
Yes. Let's just say, yeah. They were hounding, trying to get Townes in.
Yeah.
And the day of the session was the day that Townes fell.
Broke his hip. Yeah.
Broke his arm. They went to the session and he was really drunk and in bits. So they said they'd reschedule.
Mm.
But what happened? Did they ever get the reschedule?
Unfortunately not. No, he so when he fell, hurt his hip, he was hurting and didn't want to go to hospital. Then a week later, he agreed to go to the hospital. And that's when they discovered that his hip was broken. So he's basically going for a week on a broken hip. So Janine promised not to leave him there, and he let the doctors operate on him at 1 a.m. on January 1st of 97. And Janine took him home later that day, but at 10 that evening, while lying in bed nibbling on cheese crackers, sliced apples and roast beef, with his kids Will and Katie Bell nearby, and Janine on the phone was Susanna Clark, who's Guy Clark's wife.
Yes.
Townes had a heart attack and he died there and then. And
at age 53.
Yeah. 52, which was, now that I see it, was actually the same age his father
52?
died. Yeah, 52.
Yes, it was.
Same age his father died. And he died on the same day that Hank Williams had died. I think it was 1947. No, maybe not. I can't remember the exact year that Hank Williams died. I think it was 47. But yet, he had actually told a friend of his, Steve Weiner, he told him 3 or 4 times.
Steve Weiner.
Yeah. He's told Weiner 2 or 3 times that he'd live to be 52 and he wouldn't live further past that. So he was kind of, I suppose, prophetic in that. But it went on. He actually had 2 funerals, one for each of his lives. So he had one for his family. His family affair was in the North Texas town of Dido, where his father was born. And he also had a Nashville funeral for, I suppose, the music industry people, I suppose you could say. And well, apparently, go on.
No, go on.
No, I was going to get into the problems with his back catalogue and his legacy. But do you any more to add before?
Yeah. I have a few things to say before we get into that. So, he was split up with Janine for a while.
Yeah.
But she never never dropped them. Or never. She was there.
She was there when he died. Yeah.
You know, she looked after him, and he used to call her when he was upset. You know, and the same with Susanna Clark. It is a great documentary about Townes Van Zandt called "To Live, to Fly," and Guy was like, Townes had a big crush on Susanna. Would flirt her at our parties. Would ring her early in the morning when I was asleep, and Susanna was like, "No, we were just friends." But there was a bit of a friendly banter there, but he cared a lot about Susanna, and he would ring her a lot, just late at night, and want to talk to her, want to talk to the guy, and just sit for hours and talk to them. So he had a great assortment of friends that he would depend on, you know.
Yeah.
But something that wasn't mentioned, and I think it should be mentioned for where we're from, his last record that came out in 94 called No Deeper Blues, which had which had the Kkk Blues on it and Willie Boy, which was 2 songs for his son
kids.
and daughter.
Yeah.
But it was recorded in Limerick.
Oh.
Yeah, so it was recorded in
Limerick in Ireland, yeah.
Estrick Studios in Limerick. He basically in the middle of the night, he worked with a fella called Philip Donnelly. Philip Donnelly done harmonica playing for one of his earlier records. I think it was High, Low and In Between, which just a little side note, was considered his religious record. Had songs on it like No Deal and Two Hands, which are just religious songs. And Harold Egger, his tour manager, he was like, everyone wants you to do a cover of Hallelujah. And he had a great quote. He said, Hallelujah is about someone that's being saved.
Yeah.
I'll only sing it when I'm saved. And he never sung it. So, so yeah. But in the middle of the night, in his home in America, he was having night terrors, and he had this epiphany, apparently. And he rang Philip Donnelly, and it was about, he said it was about 4:00 in the morning in Ireland, and he rang him and said, I had a dream. He goes, I've got a plan. How's about we record a record? And he had this plan to record this record, and it has phenomenal stuff on it. It has uilleann pipes on it, and it's people kind of hail it as that, the end legacy of Townes, and where a lot of the songs are talkative and stuff. But it's just I think it's a great record. It's really sweet, and he wrote a song on it called Song 4, and he left it on a piece of he left it on the table. He was writing it till late in the morning because he didn't have the songs for the record. He just knew he wanted to record, so he had to write before he was going over. And Janine seen it and cried, and she was like, she goes, is this a love song? And he was like, no, this is a heartbreaking song, and it's a really, really, really nice song. There's a little funny bit in it that I think is reminds me a bit of my own dyslexia. I don't know, I've never read anywhere why this is a line, but at the chorus it goes, London to Dublin, Australia to Perth, which doesn't make any because Perth is in Australia. So I don't know what the indication was there, and I just think it's funny, but it's a great song. So I thought I'd mention that. There's some phenomenal things there, and he done a show in July or August of '94 in Whelan's.
Dublin.
In Dublin. If you want to have a look, there's a really, really, really bad recording of it, of the show online. It's just atrocious audio, but it's kind of cool to know that he played in Whelan,
at the same time.
While he cut the record here, and he done a tour. He went to Galway and had a look around, but it's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
but I think that's the end.
Apparently there was a bit of I suppose fighting over his legacy. Yes.
That's not the end of. That was the end of him, but it wasn't the end of
the music.
It actually, like, I don't think anyone got a break after he died. Like, the immediate, and the minute after he passed away, everything kind of went all over the place.
Yeah, because when he got divorced to Janine, it was actually a part of the divorce that she would get the copyright to his songs, which was in and of itself a massive thing to have gotten in a divorce, let's say. But yeah, after Townes died, Tomato, who is that record label, used to be known as Poppy, were set to release a 60-song multi-CD set, and it would have had songs, duets with people, long-term collaborators, and that including Willie Nelson, Freddie Fender, Jerry Jeff Walker, and Emmylou Harris. So they had all recorded already, and Townes had already recorded his vocals for these songs as well. But apparently, according to Janine, Kevin Eggers got Townes' blessing to bring in a group of backing singers to sing on 5 songs during the recording sessions. 2 years later, she says that Eggers brought the choir, or the group of backup singers, back in to sing on 25 more songs without Townes' knowledge, and apparently they drown him out. Their vocals drown his vocals out. And apparently Eggers says, no, they've always been on the songs and Townes loved them. But Janine threatened to sue to prevent the release. She says it can't come out with those cows mooing over Townes. So, he says he'll put the records, Eggers will put the records on a shelf if she keeps harassing me. But apparently, she kept inserting herself into the thick of Townes' career and continuing to do so after his death bothered a lot of people, apparently. But then again, she did have all the copyrights that he ever owned. And she's a co-executor of his estate. But there's a whole lot of to and fro, and it's always the way with someone like that, someone big that leaves a big musical legacy. There's always people squabbling over it and fighting over what's left.
I think you read one side of it.
Yeah,
because there is like I wouldn't know a lot about it, but I know some say that Townes just wanted, especially in his later years, he was like, all I want really is for my family to, for the kids mainly. And Janine, he loved Janine. Out of all his 3 wives, like, she was the one that kind of, stuck around and really looked after him, like, and so I think that was where he came with the idea of giving him the rights. And Kevin, some say, he was kind of hated for the first record, and Townes never
putting too much of a polish on the first record. Yeah,
Townes never was big into production either. He didn't care.
Keep it simple. He wanted to do it. So yeah.
Well, not even. He actually didn't. He didn't care. Like, he would show up and play, and someone else would produce it. And Kevin would be clashing with the producer, and apparently one of the producers left, walked out because he said, I can't work with him. There was a record that was meant to come out. I think it was Delta Mama Blues, and that was hassled for ages because Kevin wouldn't pay the producer, but the producers had, like, the masters and all for the record. So there was a lot of that, and there's a lot of Townes never caring about money. So, apparently there's stories of Kevin kind of swindling him out of cash, and so there's 2 sides of every kind of.
That's it. Everyone has their own view of the story, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, it's but he was a man that lived a longer life than most troubadours out there, but it was fast and probably short and his own eyes, Yeah,
it's true. That's true. And just actually another little bit of trivia before we end. So Merle Haggard and Willie Nelson did do the song Pancho and Lefty. They made it absolutely humongous. And did you know that Townes himself made a cameo in the music video? He was sitting at a table playing guitar, I think it was, in that bar that they have the music video set in.
No way.
Yeah, so if you're watching that video, have a look out for Townes. He's in there.
I'll have to watch that, yeah. And I completely forgot to say about that video because I know yeah. Oh, that song. So Townes was caught speeding one late night in Texas, caught speeding by two police officers. One was a white man and the other was a Mexican. And they pulled them over and they put him in the back of the car and they were chatting to him. And he said, turned to them and goes, he's trying to get out of it. And he goes, you know that song, Pancho and Lefty? And at the time, Willie Nelson done the cover and it blew up. And you know that song, Pancho and Lefty? And they were both like, yeah, you know that. And he's like, I wrote that.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, really? And he had, records with him and stuff. So we showed them and they were blown away and they let him off. And as he was walking away to get back in the car, he turns to them and he goes, can I just ask, which one of you is Pancho and which one of you is Lefty? And the Mexican points at the white guy and goes, he's Pancho, I'm Lefty. But it's so good to hear, like, it's really like he, even to this day, like there's songs out there like that people just don't know.
Yeah.
They're from him. And even that record that, the record you were saying that Kevin Neggers was working on after he died, he recorded all the tracks and they were getting artists come in to sing. Like it wasn't, he didn't record it with them while he was alive. It was like his one, he died and they were bringing people in. Yeah. But I don't think it was never released, was it?
Doesn't look like it was.
No, I know there's
here that it was.
There was a record that came out that only came out about a year ago. And it was phenomenal. And it was one of these, I don't know, I have to look into where it came from, how it popped up. But it was an album that he did, and it's all just him and Guy Clark. It's just a record that he did, and it was on Spotify, and can't remember what the name of it was, to be perfectly honest with you.
Right.
But it came out.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as you're trying to find that there, I have a Spotify playlist for this podcast that I put a few songs of the artist that we talk about and the guest. So after this, as this episode goes out, I'll put the link to the Spotify playlist in the description of the show, and you can go there and you can find songs from previous episodes and guests. And also I'll put a few Townes Van Zandt songs on it and a few of Mr. Kenan Flannery songs.
Me?
Yeah, you.
That's very kind of you.
Absolutely. But Kenan, I suppose we'll wrap up the episode. Did you find the name of that album?
I have it just here now. My phone froze. Technology nowadays, copper. It never works. Never works the way I wanted to.
That's it.
But how many episodes has this been now?
This is the what was it? 6th, 7th? I'm not sure. I lost count now already.
That's the old age getting to you.
That's it. What's the name of the album? You're leaving us hanging here.
I am leaving you hanging. I'm trying to idle. My phone is just
still frozen.
Well, it's not frozen. It's just not loading.
Yeah.
So here we go. So let me came out Townes Van Zandt. Should put some elevator music on or something. It's called Somebody Had to Write It, and it came out in 2020.
Okay.
Sure. No, that's a different one. But
new one since you had one you were talking about.
Yeah, they're popping out everywhere.
Yeah, probably figured out some of those legal issues and they started putting them out a
Yeah,
bit.
there was a plenty that came out. There was one. Yeah, he did one. There we go. It's called the Highway Kind, and came out. That one actually came out in 1997.
Right.
Which was the year he died.
Yeah, the year. Yeah, that's right.
But
Right.
it has covers. You know, Dublin Blues from
I do. Guy Clark does that, does he?
Guy Clark. Yeah.
Yeah.
Townes does a cover of that, and other few tunes. But Guy Clark sings on it.
Yeah.
But there's been a few things. Something came out in 2018, 2019, and 2020. So I think the legal things are
Must have started out.
album A with 41 songs, another one with 11, and
Right.
another one. So
I'd recommend now to any listeners that have, I suppose, if we've piqued your interest in Townes Van Zandt, at this stage, just an hour and a half into this, you probably, if you're still listening, fair play. But yeah, definitely go check these albums out. I'll add some songs to the playlist as well as Kenan's own songs. So we'll wrap up the episode here. Kenan, before we go, where can people find you and your music?
Yes, this dreaded question. We never get it right in our own podcast, but you can find me on Kenan Flannery Music, Kenan, like Kenan Kell, for the Irish listeners.
That's it.
And Flannery,
Who loves orange soda?
Who loves orange soda? And then it's Flannery, FLANNERY, and then music.
Cool.
On all the places, Spotify, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram.
I'll put a link in the show notes or show description to your link tree, and that'll bring you to everywhere.
Link tree, yes.
Yes.
Once you get onto the link tree, they're great. Once you got onto the link tree, everything's there. So,
And that's it. And I suppose if you want to follow the podcast itself, go over to Facebook and Instagram. It's Copper's Corner Podcast, and you'll see updates on new episodes. And if you do want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/Copper's Corner Podcast. And I'll hopefully be doing some bonus material on it soon. I'm thinking of some ideas still. But if you want to DM me or whatever, let me know if there's any sort of bonus, I suppose, content you like to see on a Patreon. If you're willing to go over and help support the show, let me know. But I think that covers just about everything. And of course, we can't go on without saying that myself and Kenan have another podcast called the Art Saddle Podcast. Yeah. So you can go over there. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and YouTube and everywhere as well. I'll put a link in the description to that podcast and our social medias. And again, that's a music news podcast. And it's a good bit of crack. We have guests and so on as well. And
we have guests that talk about all different parts of the industry and interesting things about mixing and mastering and gigging and everything in between. And we have a bit of crack as well. And yeah. So we're very serious.
That's it. But look, thanks very much for listening. And I want to thank Kenan for coming on. I know we were only talking the other day on our other podcast, but
I could never. No, thank you so much, Copper, for having me on. You're doing an awesome job over here.
No.
I do.
No, absolutely. Thanks very much. And I think this must be our longest episode. I think the Elvis Presley one with Brian O'Connor for Concerts Made Us was the longest.
See, you can trust me to talk for a while. So,
see, good man yourself.
Thanks a million, man.
Yeah. That's it. Thanks very much. And look, thanks, lovely listener, for listening this far. And stick around if you hit the follow and subscribe or whatever you're on, whatever platform you're listening. Do that so you won't miss any future episodes.
All the best.
And we'll be back to you next time with another history packed episode. And so I want to say goodbye to Kenan and goodbye to lovely listeners. All the best to you.